So I think what we're going to do is, while they're still working on the booth and getting simultaneous interpretation, we'll begin with some consecutive interpretation with the Comanche interpreter, who will do a whispering interpreting, either whispering or consecutive, whichever is easiest for you to do. So, and we thank you for being here. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the 89th meeting of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, as we continue our briefing on resettlement issues related to Yazidi women and girls. One of the issues that has come up in the settlement process of a population with a small population with a non-widely disseminated language is in providing interpretation, and the difficulties and challenges of providing that. And we're actually seeing that this morning. We had testimony at our last meeting from community interpreters talking about both the finding interpreters that are professional or could be accredited in some way in a language that doesn't have that formal thing. So we're going to begin with Professor Clifford, who does teach in the area of conference interpreting, but also has experience in the field of generally interpreting and translation. So, Professor Clifford, welcome. And you have 7 minutes.
I had intended to make some comments first in French, and then I will continue on in English. I would like, firstly, to thank you, Chairman, and all the members of the committee for having invited me. You can choose 2 for English. It's still 2 for English. Channel 2 for English.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As I said, I want to thank you for the invitation. I want to speak today about the training of interpreters, which is something that is very near to my heart. I would like to draw you and the outline of the program that I represent, the Masters in Conference Interpreting, and I would like to share the obstacles that exist in terms of interpretation, but in the context of the Yazidi situation being resettled here in Canada. First of all, now, with respect to the program here at Glendon College at York University, it is a master's program over 2 years. The first year is given entirely online to students who are all over the planet, and the second is here on-site in Toronto. The program has 2 goals. First of all, to train conference interpreters like those who are working in the booth in your committee room. And we train interpreters for other markets. We work certainly with English and French, but also with Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Turkish language, and Arabic. Our graduates work on Parliament Hill, but also in international fora at the United Nations and on various private markets. Indeed, it's very interesting. Graduates of Glendon College's program are part of the first 500 a year or 2 ago that helped one of the groups to re-establish, to resettle the Yazidis here, and also the Syrians some 2 years ago.
Introduction to the program that I'm responsible for here at the university. I'd like to now maybe talk about 2 obstacles that we're facing, 2 obstacles that are interrelated, and that I think might have an impact on some of the issues that you're looking at. First off, I'll say that it's not very easy for us to find qualified applicants. We do have to sort of look around the world. It's one of the reasons why we do some of our training online. And when the time comes to bring those students to Canada, it's not always easy. This is particularly true with Middle Eastern languages. Our applicants are routinely refused study permits. In fact, I'm dealing with a case now where an applicant is a trained translator. She works with written translation, and she'd like now to become a trained interpreter. But an embassy official refused her study permit because apparently he didn't understand that there was a difference between translation and interpreting, and said, well, you already have training in this area. You don't need to come to Canada. So that's sort of the first obstacle that we face, trying to get qualified applicants into the program. And it's connected to the second obstacle that we face, which I think is in large part due to the ignorance that the public has about the complexities of interpreting. It's very wrongly assumed by most people outside the field that it's not a very difficult task, and that if you speak two languages, well, then that's enough. In fact, interpreting is a very specialized skill, whether that takes place in the conference setting or in the community setting. And one of the things, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention about Glendon is that while we train conference interpreters, we also train people for the community market. We have courses in medical and in legal interpreting, and students that finish the first year with us and don't go on to the second year often go into the market as community interpreters. So just to give you a very brief idea of how specialized the skill is, we know of cases, for example, where a patient who didn't speak English went into a hospital, and a family member who spoke both languages interpreted for them, but a mix-up in the word right and left resulted in a patient having the wrong leg amputated, and instead of being a single amputee, he wound up being a double amputee. A case here in Canada, confusion between the words back and stomach led a BC man to lose his leg, his kidney, and to be paralyzed in his right arm. So this is not work that we want to put into the hands of people who are untrained or unqualified. It's often grossly underestimated, the skill that's required to do this work, and as a consequence, it tends to be grossly undervalued and grossly undercompensated. What tends to happen is that someone who goes into community interpreting, who has the skill set to do the work well, doesn't find the compensation they're looking for, that they need, and so they tend to leave. It's very difficult for us to build capacity in community interpreting with the high turnover of interpreters. I know that last week you heard from my colleague Lola Bendana, who is very active on several fronts in our field, with the National Standard Guide for Community Interpreting, with the championing of the language interpreter training program at a number of community colleges here in Ontario, and also with the Ontario Coalition for Community Interpreting and its new accreditation system. So you have a sense perhaps of the landscape that is out there and that many of us are trying to build and get off the ground. But I would argue that a lot more needs to be done to ensure that when interpretation is needed, that trained interpreters are used, that those interpreters are remunerated adequately, and that in many cases, the interpreters have help gaining access to training and accreditation. If we're a country that relies on immigration to support our labor force and to feed into our social safety net, then it's time for us to recognize that interpretation plays a key role in the settling of newcomers to this country, and we should get serious about supporting interpretation. That's what I have to say to you now, Ben. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and your timing was excellent. Lobat Sadra Hashimi, am I close?
Yes, you are.
Sadra Hashimi, welcome, and you have 7 minutes to share.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for the invitation to speak to you today. I work as a refugee lawyer in Vancouver, and I'm the president of the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, but I am speaking on my own behalf today. And I should say before I start my comments that my work is and has primarily been with refugees who have already somehow made their way to Canada. Then your English will be sent over to them. And I do not have specific expertise on the situation of Yazidi refugees. Where I thought I could make some contribution to your study is on 2 points. First, the specialized services needed for refugees who've experienced severe trauma, including the need for family reunification, and more broadly, Canada's resettlement program. So first, on specialized services needed for refugees who arrive in Canada, I have experience working with women who've experienced violence and gender persecution. At one time, this was the primary focus of my practice. Each case is different, and the particular needs of community will, of course, vary. But there is no doubt to me that arriving in a safe country is not the end of the journey of feeling safe and secure. The work continues, and in some cases for many years after a refugee's resettlement. You've heard from a number of witnesses about the specialized services needed for Yazidi refugees, women and children who have suffered horrific abuses and have come to Canada with severe trauma. I urge the committee to listen to the voices of the survivors themselves and to those who are working with these communities about the specialized services that would benefit them in resettlement. I echo the comments made this morning about the importance of proper interpretation and the use of trained interpreters in this work. Canada has undertaken a special program to bring these refugees to Canada, and when we bring refugees to Canada, we also have an obligation to try and estimate the types of services that they may need and monitor and respond to their needs. Refugees who've experienced this kind of trauma need specialized services. It's important to pay attention to the services that they need and respond, and investment in these services is not only the right thing to do, but it also will likely mean community integration happens faster. You have heard from survivors and those who work with them in Canada that family separation is particularly devastating to those who've experienced severe trauma and have been resettled. Family unification has been recognized by the UNHCR and by the government as the essential step in refugee resettlement. The UNHCR has recognized the family as the essential right of a refugee in its 1983 guidelines on the unification of refugee families. There's been research that has found, an Australian study, for example, in 2013, about the persuasive impacts on the well-being of refugees and on their capacity to participate and to direct their own futures, where the impact of being separated from their families. And the study concluded that family unification must be a critical consideration in an individual's social, in the design and provision of settlement services to a refugee. For refugees who've survived trauma, separation from family can be especially difficult. Having your family together is absolutely critical to feeling safe and protected in one's new home, and efforts to reunify families have to be considered as part of our resettlement strategy. And this may be done through special programs and does not necessarily have to be through the resettlement process. The second point I have to make is about setting priorities for Canada's resettlement program. It is no easy task to decide who is chosen for resettlement for Canada and who is left behind. And I want to echo the comments made by the UNHCR representative who appeared before you, as well as Professor Shauna Lobnan, who both talked about establishing priorities for resettlement based on the UNHCR's global resettlement criteria. These are objective criteria based on legal and physical protection needs, survivors of violence and torture, medical needs, women at risk, children at risk, and so on. And where we do have special programs and initiatives for particular groups of refugees, this should not be carved out of Canada's targets that have already been set by the government for resettlement. When viewed in the context of the scale of the crisis, Canada's targets on resettlement are not high. In 2018, we've capped government-assisted refugees to 7,500. As many of you know, there are refugees suffering in camps all over the world who have been victims of rape, torture, who have lost their family members, and who feel forgotten by Canada and the world as they wait to be resettled. And I would be remiss if I did not say to a committee studying refugees, and it's been said many times, but it is worth repeating that this is a global refugee crisis. There has never been so many displaced people since World War II. And with these increasing numbers, in my view, Canada, as a wealthy nation, needs to respond by increasing its numbers, and in particular, the number of government-assisted refugees is particularly low. Thank you. Those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to Nadra Atto, and Aveen is going to be with her, but Nadra will begin. And I think we'll probably have interpretation on, we'll see what channel comes up. You can begin. Thank you.
قالك سباسيا وهمياتكم اشبركو ودستور دائمي اساتما يعني قصة تاخو بيجم قالك سباس اشبو مساجي قالك سباس بو حكومة كندا اشبركو يعني
So a minute. We're just trying to find English or French.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Canadian government, to letting us all this help, and also thank you for all you to let me know, to let me express my problems. I really thank you. I was under arrest by ISIS for 2 years. I was in the point to commit suicide, and my kids were with me, but I couldn't do anything for them because I was AZD. More than 10,000 I was sold. All I want from the Canadian government and from the authority, if they could help us to let our people be released, be freed from ISIS. I'm one of them, and there's a lots of people like me, and even some of them, they got a worse situation. Our honor, we shouldn't let no my honor be on their hand. And also my 10 years old daughter, she got married with a terrorist in front of my eyes. Who could accept his own kids to be married to somebody in that age? 8 members of my family, and also plus my daughter, all they are in hand of ISIS, and we have no info, and nobody could help us, and we have no info about them, what happened to them. I'm really thankful and grateful. I just wish, I hope you guys help AZD people. And also I'm thankful for Canadian government to helping our people. I was 2 years under arrest, and I had too many things seen from them. I am not happy really here because my mom and also my daughter, they are not here, and always I'm crying and thinking about them. I'm not comfortable here. I hope you do something to find our mass graves with young and women and girls all being killed and buried. And we should find out all these bodies and let the family know. And this all is happened to our AZDs. It's 80 times we've been massacred by those people. In 2017, Daesh did the explosion in the area of AZD, They tried to massacre and kill all the AZD. And they killed my dad, they killed my uncle, my brother was wounded. 5 members of my family in 1 hour all gone. That's all happened to my family, but still see, not once or twice, it's too many times it's happened to us. I'm begging, and I hope you guys be helpful for us and try some kind of ways to release our people. And when I came to Canada, I have no information about Canada. I didn't know any English. My brother was with me. I went to the hotel. I was in the hotel for 2 months. It was a very hard time for me because I had a trauma, and still I was kind of afraid and scared. There were no AZD to help me or any other people. There were no one to help us. After a month in this situation, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to go. There were 2 Yazidi people by the name of Haidar and Ismail. They came and they helped us a lot. They rented house for us also. We even couldn't know how to rent the house. This has been 5 months. We've been in Canada. Still, we are here. We are refugee here. So we expect Canadian government to help us more. بجتني دقيقة. Okay. We want, if you be helpful more, to bring more AZD in this situation and help us. And we have our rent is too high. If you could help us, and also if you could bring my brother, sister, and my mom. I tried to commit suicide 3 times, but because of my kids, I couldn't. My kids was 10 years old in front of my eyes. She was forced to marry with ISIS terrorists. I hope you help us to bring and make them free, all those kids and those girls. Thank you for helping AZD, especially not Jamrod, and thank you. Thanks all.
Masood Freedom Foundation, Debbie Rose and Gary Rose. I'm not sure who's going to begin. Thank you.
On behalf of Project Abraham and the Richmond Hill Yazidi community, I want to express our heartfelt gratitude to the Government of Canada for having brought survivors of the Yazidi genocide to Canada, where they can survive and thrive. It's only time constraint that compels me to leave out any of the wonderful successes we've observed in the resettlement activities of this Yazidi community and to focus solely on the challenges. Please let it be noted in the record that all recommendations provided by Operation Ezra are also the recommendations of Project Abraham. We provide the same services, have run into the same challenges in the resettlement of the GARs, and our recommendations are the same. Many of our GAR families are going hungry while waiting for child benefit payments. Without these payments, the money provided to them barely covers rent, let alone anything else. Child benefit payments should arrive within 11 weeks from the time of application. However, there's a continual glitch where around this time, the family receives notification that the government is waiting to receive information on the spouse's income. This from grieving widows. So, in reality, some families do not see these payments for up to 6 months. The experience of arriving in Canada often exacerbates the trauma of Yazidi refugees. They are met by people who speak the language of their oppressors. They are taken to a dirty hotel room where it can take a couple days before anyone communicates with them. They have no knowledge of an existing Yazidi community who could immediately welcome them, which would go a very long ways toward bringing them comfort. The food is alien and for some seemingly inedible. They are not given adequate orientation on what they can expect to happen next. They get minimal, if any, help in finding a home. Some believed that they were back in the hands of ISIS. From their perspective, their future is uncertain and frightening. There is huge ongoing stress for Yazidis due to being separated from surviving family members who are still in Iraq. The Canadian government allows for family reunification under the one-year window of opportunity provision, which assumes that family members left behind are identified in the original application, often not done by Yazidis who believe these family members are dead. Sometimes spouses and children are discovered alive after the fact, and under the current provision cannot be brought over without a long, drawn-out process that could take years. Project Abraham raises money to help with resettlement projects as well as to bring in more privately sponsored Yazidi families. However, it is challenging to raise funds for the administrative costs involved in managing the larger project. If Project Abraham had funds available to hire more staff, there's so much more we could do to help our Yazidi community. As a result of all issues mentioned here, Project Abraham would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Inform the local Yazidi community when Yazidi refugees will arrive and where they will be placed so that a delegation can meet them at the airport and provide immediate support. 2. Expedite the processing of child benefit payments and correct the application to reflect the correct information regarding widows. 3. Extend the one-year window of opportunity provision for victims of genocide to include family members who are discovered to be alive after the refugee families have emigrated to Canada. In addition, for the special needs of this community, extend this provision to siblings and parents. 4. Provide funding for staff for grassroots resettlement undertakings like Project Abraham and Operation Ezra, who are working daily with the Yazidi community to help them resettle, heal, and integrate fully into Canadian society, enhancing the existing government services. 5. Prioritize genocide as a criterion for selecting refugees to resettle in Canada, and therefore work outside of the UNHCR, who has stated it does not use genocide as a criterion, directly contravening both the UN and the GOC mandate. To speak more on this, I'll pass the floor to our Communication Director, Gary Rose.
The Government of Canada has proudly done the right thing. It has recognized that Canada has a moral obligation to protect the Yazidis from the existential threat of genocide, and has responded by committing to relocate women and children survivors of ISIS to Canada. While its execution of the relocation has not been without problems, its moral intent needs to be congratulated. Still, Canada, as a signee to the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, must continue to do more for the Yazidis. It is an obligation that must not end with the current initiative, since it is not only fundamental to the role Canada has taken in the world as a peacekeeper and a nation that respects the right of all peoples to live in freedom, it is also our duty by international agreement. We cannot claim the moral high ground by limiting sanctuary for a people who have experienced genocide. We must, as a moral nation, do our fullest to uphold our commitment and continue to help the survivors. So it was with great pain as a Canadian And as a Jew who knows only too well about genocide, that the representative of the UNHCR speaking before this committee refused to acknowledge the obligation of the UN regarding the Yazidi genocide. It was with great pain that I heard from his lips that the UNHCR is ignoring its mandate as required by the 1948 Geneva Convention by having a stated policy that disregards and contradicts the policy of the Government of Canada's on the genocide of the Yazidis. And it was even more astonishing to hear it given that a survivor of the Yazidi genocide, Nadia Murad, is a UN Goodwill Ambassador and spokesperson who is demanding justice for her people. Given this flagrant disregard, I urge the Government of Canada, out of respect for its moral leadership, to continue the Canadian initiative to help the Yazidis, who are still facing an existential crisis, by following the UN's government lead to no longer fund the UNHCR in regard to the minorities in Iraq and commit to work directly through its own agencies and NGOs on the ground in Iraq to resettle Yazidi refugees who need sanctuary.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to go to our questioning round, and Mr. Tabara, and I'll just give you notice, I'll be pretty tight on the 7 minutes today.
Okay,
Thanks.
just give me a 1 minute warning if you can. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would actually tell all members to have their staff give them a 1 minute
Okay, no
warning.
problem.
That would be the role of the staff.
Okay.
And I will try, but I'm usually listening to the testimony and the questions.
Thank you for all the witnesses being here today, and thank you for your bravery and sharing your much-needed story with the committee. I think the committee needs to hear about what's been happening, and unfortunately, with lack of security and stability, atrocities like this happen often too many, and the world needs to pay attention to these atrocities. One thing, this is our final meeting on resettlement issues regarding the Yazidis, and we really want to come out with this committee on recommendations of what we can do with the resettled Yazidis that we have here now. I thank you all for your testimonies. In regards to language training and interpretation, Mr. Clifford, you mentioned in your testimony that it wasn't very easy to find these interpreters and translators, and oftentimes you can't. Some people can translate, but they can't interpret. And you gave an example of individuals going into medical clinics or into hospitals, and they've given the wrong information, and you've mentioned some of the outcomes of that. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure, I can. I'm going to start, though, by making a distinction. There are two things that you said that I just want to make very clear. What we're talking about here is not language training. When people come to an interpreter training program, the assumption is that they already have a very strong command of their working languages. We don't train them to speak another language. We train them to interpret, because the skill set to interpret is extremely demanding. The languages are in place before they come to us. The other distinction that I want to make is between written translation on one hand and spoken interpreting on the other. Those are two separate skill sets, although connected in some ways. Very often in interpreting programs, the people that come to us have a background in written translation, and we use that as a springboard to teach them to interpret. The examples that I was giving, one was based in the United States and the other one was based in Canada, and they are typical of what tends to happen. About 10 years ago, I was part of a study that was conducted in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. We spoke with 150 different primary care physicians, nurses, and social workers who deal with patients who don't speak the dominant language, either English or French, and the services that are provided. And we heard stories like these, where very often family members are called upon to interpret, and that's clearly not sufficient. In some cases, family members may not even have the language competency, and they certainly don't have the interpreting training.
So I want to get, maybe if I can just interrupt and just get specific on Kurmanji, the language, some of the difficulties that you've been finding. I know we've had witnesses in London, and they said because there's a larger Yazidi population there, it was a little bit easier for them to find interpreters and translators. How difficult is it for you to find qualified applicants? Because that's what you mentioned in your testimony, that it's hard to find qualified applicants.
Absolutely. I'll start off by saying that we don't actually work with Kurmanji. We work with the languages that I mentioned at the outset. So the closest and most relevant language that we work with might be Arabic. But I can talk generally about how difficult it is to find people who have the qualifications. We're looking for very rare individuals. We're looking for people who probably have a university degree. In my case, they have to have a university degree. We're a graduate program. In the case of the language interpreter training program, which is offered by the community colleges in Ontario, the requirements are a little less stringent, but still there. So we're looking for somebody who has prior university training, speaks the two languages, can pass an entry test, and has the ability to analyze situations. What's challenging about interpreting in the community setting might be going back and forth, rendering a message from one language to another, but it's very often dealing with the differential, the power differential between the two players that are face to face. In the medical setting, for example, imagine a doctor who's very often white, male, invested with a lot of education and power in the institution where he's working on one hand, and then maybe it's a refugee who often is a woman, a person of color, hasn't had access to a lot of education, does not have a lot of power in that situation. And communicating back and forth is what's actually the difficulty.
Okay, thank you. If I can get to my next question for Ms. Labatt. We had a witness named John Nicholas Bose from the UN, and he mentioned just the need for refugees around the world and the need for resettlement. And he gave us some numbers to really understand the instability that is happening around the world. So I'm just going to read out a little bit. There's 65.6 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, 22.5 million refugees, and 10 million stateless people. And in 2016, there was only roughly 190 refugees resettled. So you can see the millions of numbers of people that are in need and the small amount. So yes, the world needs to take more action, maybe more states. Canada has taken a really good action with welcoming over 50,000 Syrian refugees, and we've committed to 1,200 Yazidis as well. And 55% of the refugees worldwide come from South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Syria. And these areas are majority of where the refugees are coming from. So how do you suggest Canada balance the interests of all refugees and vulnerable groups without prioritizing ethnic groups? We need to ensure that we're bringing refugees from all around the world because the need is so great.
Right. Yeah, and my it's an incredibly difficult task to be able to figure out who is the most vulnerable among the most vulnerable, and that's why I do think an objective criteria, which is necessary. It is necessary to have some sort of objective criteria, and that's why I referred to the global resettlement criteria. That's not perfect, and of course, there are crises that elevate the need for protection on a localized basis, and it is completely appropriate for Canada to have special programs in those circumstances. But I think the main point is that it is a global crisis, and to maintain our numbers at 7,500 for government-assisted refugees it's much too low.
Thank you. I need to end you there. Ms. Rampel.
Nadre. Canada needs to bring justice to your people. How do we bring justice to your people?
She can't hear.
She's not hearing the translation.
Is the translator in? Better. Okay. Yeah. Get on.
Nadre, Canada needs to bring justice to the Yazidi people. How do we bring justice to your people?
يعني ما في حقي ما إزديا ببان تشتي بكاربن ما في آري كاري بكن يعني إزديا أجوان خيمة خلاص بكن يعني سالي بس خدي زاني
they should help to
يعني بيخسيري ما فرابن داعش يعني حالي هماي وكي منا حكومة عراقي دبيجي وكندا دبيجي أم إزديان دس داعش بي يعني حتى إنه دس داعش بي هم حالي هماي وكي منا.
Hold on for 1 second. I'm not getting English interpretation. Sure. Well, I think we're going to bring the interpreter out, and he will, if people would speak in short sentence, in short points, and we'll have a consecutive interpretation. I think if there's a technical problem. I still think we should have a technician working on that, however. Excuse me. Ms. Rose, could I have you move over one seat so that the interpreter could have a microphone, because he'll need to be speaking into a microphone for us to be able to hear and then to translate into French. I think the language professionals are happy to see us having troubles, so we understand the complexity of their world.
That's right.
I'm going to ask Ms. Atto to repeat her,
Yes.
unless the interpreter got her her response. Would you like to have it repeated?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay, أنا بيجا دولة كندا تشد كورا قالي إزدي ربك يعني تشد بي بكرة بنا كوبي أو نا عدالتيا أو بإنصافية وان راحتي كرني دولة كندا در حقيقة ده تشد كورا بك.
كارين يعني إزدياج عراقي بين نجس يعني نج تركيا بين.
And they could bring Izidi from Syria,
Yeah.
not from Iraq.
From Iraq.
From
She
Iraq
said
too.
from Iraq.
From Iraq, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
They should bring most of the Izidi from Iraq to here. This is one of the help they could do.
Okay. Ms. Rempel?
ديش تشتري الكار ميكا.
تشتي يعني أول هم يعني أفبوسة سالة يعني ناموسا إزديا لدسة داعش ده يعني أول هم يكي مساعدة منا كريا عريكاريا منا كريا يعني كجوجنة ما جدسة داعش خلاص بكا.
This has been 3 years. Our honor has been managed in the hand of ISIS, and nobody been done any kind of help to us to do and rescue those family and those women, those people from the ISIS. They should do something to do about it.
يعني عمري كان من 6 سال يعني في 6 سال عمري 10 سال من نادية عمري 10 سال يعني كي بشر قبولتك يعني زوج عندن 10 سالي.
My daughter, she was 10 years old, and she was 10 years old. 3 years ago, she was married to the terrorist. Who can accept that as a human being to happen to their family?
فيها يعني عريكاريا ما بكين يعني إزديا يعني إش عراقي بينن يعني نوع يعني نيفي يعني تركيا داعشن إزدي نويرن يعني كنا تركيا حتى نجي إش تركيا بسحبن بينن فيدري.
And they should help to bring more Izidi here to Canada, because they are not comforted. In Turkey, there's a lot of ISIS member and affiliated to the ISIS, so they are not free to go to Turkey and stay there. Canada should be helpful to bring them over here.
Nadra, you spoke about the graves of your people and the need to document them and the need for the world to understand where they are. How can Canada help you bring justice to those who have died at the hands of ISIS?
ویژتا باسا میی خواهی کرو قبری وان کچان بین وانا ناز بکن و بیجن بدن خدا نیوان تدبیجی دولت کانادایی چه وارد آری کار با چه کار آری کاری بکن چند کار آری کار با
هیوی های یعنی کاربن وان گورا وکن و یعنی کاربن وکن و یعنی زانبن هستیوان فاسکن یعنی جبرکو یعنی کی شهیده کی مالیا یعنی هشت زلام جمال عمين هاد وندانا زنزانم نت شهيد نت ساغن نت مدينة ما هذي هاي يعني أول ما وان قرابكن ومساعدة يزيديا بكن ويزيديا عراقي بسحبنا كندا يعني أسقالك ممنون يعني دولتك مساعدة يزيديا نكريا بس كندا مساعدة كريا.
Canada could be helpful to open those graves basically and examine them and find out through DNA, I think she mean. So then to find which grave, which bodies belongs to who, and to have some respect. And also Canada could be helpful to bring more Yazidi from there to here, she's mentioning again.
How can we help you?
I'm چون کن آریکار بنجوره. I'm چون آریکار یوان.
يعني إنها مذبية أصدقاء خو برايت خو جحالي خيبتا خلاص بكم أس نزانم يعني بچه ري أسكاربم داكا خو برا خوشكت خو جي عراقي خلاص بكم.
I'm looking for some way I don't know how to do to bring my mom and also my brother sister here to Canada. The condition they live in the tent in northern Iraq is very kind of difficult, so I don't know what to do if you could help.
Is there anything that you want to say, Nadre, that you want to tell the government?
إنها هتاسبة يعني مقصتا خو قوبا يعني خلاص ناقو من تشتي استحد قو من تشتكي غلط ناقو تش تشتي ما قو يعني بيترب سري معاتيا.
If I tell my story, it's gonna take days, but I just say simple part of it for you and all was honesty.
من هبيها يعني إزدياج عراق يبينن نش تركيا يبينن.
I hope you bring Yazidi family from northern Iraq, not from Turkey. They are more, I think.
يعني إجبركو يعني أم إزدينا أم دولتك يعني أتشيقكن أم نقلكن أم بلنغازن ما شريكي نكريا حتى دني أعملك دولة تعبن أم تمشكلاناكن يعني أم مشاكلة تناسري ما يزديا يعني حمي بسلمانن كسي يزدي يعني تم مشاكل نكرينا يعني بس مهيبي هيا يعني بسلمانا تينن مهيبي هيا بسلمانا نينن ما أجبركو يعني أم جبر بسلمانا ما دافش يعني ما داسش خوي أهلو التي خبر دايم هاتينا يعني هي كندا يعني ما بزحمتها يعني إجبركو ديسا يعني بسلمانا بين مدى انفجارات شيكن أب بسري مهاتيا منابي يعني بسري زديا هم بي منابي بسري كورين بي يعني مزاري خوي خلاص كدينا جبركو يعني مشاكلي وانفجارات بسلمانا.
We haven't done anything wrong to any other nations in the region. All happened to us is come from Islamic thought and those people. So we want to bring more Yazidi here. We are more needy. Instead of bringing those Muslim with that thought, they could be creating some problem here again for us. So that's all the concern she's trying to explain. Like massacre has been happening so many times against our nation, but we are not against any religion or anybody. We are peaceful people, but we don't know what is happening to us, what they're doing all this to us.
يعني إنها تقريبا دست مالي لسريج هاي شنقالي هايا يعني بخوارن بكهرب يعني معيشة تقنينا حكومة عراقي مساعدة كينا كان راتبة يعني نشغل زفستانا بارانا بسردايا يعني نزانن بريخو بدن كيدري.
It's more than 200 family in the mountain of Shangal, Sanjar. So now they have, they are in very bad situation. They have not too much resources in handy, and also nobody is taking care of them. And she mentioning them if could be some help for them. Thank you very much.
Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for your presentations. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Atto for you to share your experiences with us. I think all of us recognize that each time you tell your story, how difficult it is for you to relive the trauma and to share that with us. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to do this today. I'd like to just follow up on the question that my colleague, Ms. Rampel, asked. And Ms. Atto, you mentioned that there's some 200 families to which you're hoping that the government can do something to help relocate them, to resettle them here to Canada. I'm curious, those 200 individuals, are they registered with the UNHCR, or are they not connected with them at all?
سكريكو أو دسوت فاميلي كتا باسا وان كريتشا شنغالي دهني أم چوان دكان ولا أي كابن قالوا أو نقال سازمان ملل ناوي وان هاتيان نويسيني قيد كرني تشتك يعني تنزاني كوام نهاتنا
ناوي وانا هاتيان نويسيني حتى أنا يعني يكي ياري كاريا وانا كريا يعني بس كجو جني لدس داعش دا بس أو بنفسها خبتني كارن بين يعني نها ساتي ما ندا كامونا برايمنا خوش كمي يعني حكومة عراقين يعني قبولنا كرن بس براكيمي بريندار بو شبركو بريناوي أو مرانين يعني يدينا هيلانا مربين.
She think they not be registered with any organization over there to help them, and also she's mentioning about her brother and especially people in the hand of the ISIS. So desperate, they want to come somewhere, get somewhere, but they can't. That's a priority she's mentioning. Especially her brother and برايتاو كشكي تبرن.
نها بس برايمي أو برين داعش برين كربو يمرهاتيا.
يدقش.
ويدقش يعني همو اللي عراقينا.
See, just one of my brother, which was wounded by ISIS, so he came with us. The rest they are in Iraq.
I see. Well, thank you very much for that information. Can I ask one further question related to her family, and that is the other family members. So they are. The daughter is. Is there any way that that? Let me rephrase that. Does she know where her daughter is?
تشتكي آگاهی تسر که چه خواهنه کی داریه چامنه
نه مت معلومات نینن يعني بس سالن حتى تلفون نينا حتى أخبارك نينا شو معلوماتها جين زانن يعني جبركو شرا يعني من هيلا شرف وناموس هم ببن يعني كجامع زارو بوش بدلا من برن.
This is she said I have no information, no phone from her. And this has been 3 years, and but that was my honor. She was taken in front of my eyes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask this question of Ms. Rose, Debbie, and Gary. I think I'm going to call it. You mentioned in your presentation the need to go beyond the assistance with the UNHCR, mostly for people who may not be perhaps identified. And I think we just heard an example of that. So I want to acknowledge that recommendation that you've put forward. The other piece I want to focus in on are the numbers. We have as you know, through the summer, I had a study on the Yazidis issue. And for myself, I had always envisioned that the government, even for the 1,200 Yazidis that they have resettled, that was meant to be above and beyond the current numbers of the refugee resettlement process. But as we now learn, is not the case. That is all part and parcel of all of the Yazidis, of the refugee resettlement numbers. So to that end, I want to ask a very specific question. What number do you think the government should engage in the resettlement of Yazidis for this study, coming out of this study? What recommendations should we make to the government by way of numbers that we should try to help resettle with the Yazidis population? And then should that number be above and beyond the existing refugee resettlement program?
So I've heard other people say 5,000, and 5,000 is a good start. I don't know that we can. You know, we had 50,000 Syrians brought over. I just want to, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to this prioritization, because suffering is suffering, and if we're human and we have compassion, we're going to feel for all of the people around the world who are in these despicable situations. But genocide is the purposeful intent to eliminate a people. Now, humankind is very concerned right now about animal species going extinct. This is a whole people, a culture within humankind that is literally being wiped off the face of the earth as we speak. They were once 23 million. They're now 1 million, and those numbers are decreasing as we speak right now. They're going. This is a peaceful people who say prayers for every other culture in the world before they say prayers for themselves. They adore their children, and this is happening to them, and the world doesn't seem to care. So when we're looking at something like a genocide, you know, we're more concerned about whether polar bears are going to survive, but we're not concerned about the Yazidis surviving. I can't put a number on it. Okay. Personally.
Thank you. Yes, we've heard that through the committee. 5,000 would be a good start, and to build on that. I guess more specifically, can you confirm for me that whatever the number that the government resettles, that number should be above and beyond the existing refugee program in terms of the government-assisted refugees? Can I just get a short answer, because I feel that I'm going to run out of time very quickly?
Yes.
Yes, we would be in agreement with that. Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Lobat. Just to clarify, I think I heard you say that in the resettlement of the Yazidis, that it should be a special program above and beyond the existing GARs?
That's correct.
And that the 7,500 GARs, that number should also increase out of the 2018 levels targets?
That's correct.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Mr. Whalen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming today and telling us your stories. Ms. Sandra Hashima, could you just explain quickly to us the priorities for different ethnicities to come to Canada, and why it's not the practice of the UNHCR to deviate or to differentiate based on ethnicity, but to focus on vulnerability?
My understanding is that without objective criteria, the task runs the risk of becoming arbitrary and fraught. And I'm not saying that these special programs were arbitrary. I'm not saying that at all, because there was clearly a pressing need and an urgency. But there is the risk, and I think that's why the UNHCR has an objective criteria based on need and vulnerability, that where you pursue special programs, especially in the place of, instead of in addition to the general refugee resettlement program, that then the process could end up becoming based on a host of factors. For example, what stories are getting coverage in the media, or the wishes of different community groups. It becomes very difficult. It is very difficult, and so that is the purpose of having objective criteria.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clifford, in your experience, is there a critical mass of people that we would need to have in Canada who are part of a particular linguistic minority in order for us to be able to successfully develop interpretation capacity here? It seems that this is a problem that won't be quick for us to solve. So can we do it, and how long do you expect it would it take for us to develop sufficient capacity for Kurmanji interpretation?
That's an excellent question. I wish I could give you a number to say if so many people, X number of people were settled, then that would sort of spill over into X number of interpreters. Unfortunately, I can't. The one thing that I can do is point out some of the issues that are facing languages of lesser diffusion. So, for example, very often in a small language community, it's difficult for the interpreters to work because when they show up to a setting where there's a service provider and the person who needs interpretation, they're known to the person, so they recognize one another because the community is very small. One of the ways around that is to do what we're doing, and that is to train people online, because then, for example, somebody who lives in Toronto and who's trained as an interpreter in Toronto could work in Vancouver and vice versa. So there's a lesser likelihood that they're going to then bump into the person they've interpreted for at a local community.
Thank you. That's very interesting, Mr. Clifford. To the Roses, I mean, when I look at the location of the populations of Yazidis around the world, obviously Iraq and then Germany has about 100,000, Syria 70,000, Russia 60,000. While Canada does have a direct role to help and resettle, and we're trying our best now to do it, but it's fraught with problems, mostly associated with the fact that there are so few Yazidis here in Canada. Does Canada have a role, and what is it in demanding and encouraging other countries to do their part in taking in Yazidi refugees, countries that might be more successful at this?
Well, Canada has put itself out as a humanitarian leader in the world, as a peacekeeper. I would presume, especially in the case of genocide, when, as I have mentioned, we've signed on to the 1948 Geneva Convention, that we have a moral obligation.
Sorry, but what should we be doing with respect to other countries? Because the Genocide Convention talks about prosecuting and prosecuting genocide.
It also talks about protecting as well. What should we be doing with is your question, with other countries? Yes. We should be promoting other countries to do what Canada is doing. We should be spokespersons advocating for the Yazidis, that if Canada can bring in Yazidis, if Germany can bring in Yazidis, if Australia can bring in Yazidis, other countries who are wealthy nations, especially the United States, who have a community of Yazidis, can bring in more Yazidis.
Mr. Clifford, this brings me back to you. Is there a way that we can try to develop a program for Kurmanji translation by reaching out to Germans, by reaching out to Americans and the populations of Yazidis in other countries to help us develop this capacity, which Ms. Rempel has rightly pointed out online is a real deficiency of our attempts here?
Yeah, so just once again, it's interpreting we're talking about, not translation.
Sorry, I'm always making that mistake.
Yeah. Yes is the short answer. So one of the things that I can tell you about the field in general is that there's a very strong movement towards the remote delivery of interpreting services. So myself as an interpreter, about half the work that I do is remote from my clients, and increasingly there are platforms that people can use. So that's happening at the level of service provision. So I don't need to be in Ottawa to provide service to people who are in Ottawa, that kind of thing. It's starting to happen internationally as well. People are getting recruited for assignments that are taking place in other countries. What we have yet to do in a systematic way is to use remote platforms to connect people and to make training easier and more accessible. So for example, here in Toronto, I may not get a critical mass that I would require to train with Kurmanji, but if I were able to link up with other institutions sort of around the world, we might together reach that critical mass. We're not doing that work yet.
And in terms of responsibility for paying for and funding the development of this capacity, where does it lie? And I put this to each of them. Who should be responsible for paying for this development of capacity? Mr. Clifford?
Well, I won't lie to you, this is not a money-making proposition for a university. The program that I run could not exist without external funding.
Should the federal government support it?
We have in the past had federal funding. Yes, I think so.
And I would actually ask the translator for Ms. Ado, who has helped you, so the interpreter, who has helped you or paid for your training in interpretation?
For mine? Yeah. Well, I'm working for what's called CISOC.
Met them last week.
Yes. CISOC contacted me and sent me the second time I'm here.
Okay.
Ms. Rempel, Mr. McGuire, you have 5 minutes.
Ms. Sandra Hashimi, we're beating around the bush on an issue here, and that's that the UNHCR failed to recommend Yazidi genocide survivors to Canada through the Syrian Refugee Initiative, and frankly through the GAR program after the Sinjar massacre. Can get into the partisan politics of it. There was an audit issued. It became a campaign issue. There were, failed allegations of racism. We've gone through 2 years of fighting on whether or not this should happen, and the UN criteria always comes down. It's used as a wedge. So I agree that there needs to be objective criteria. However, in this instance, it is very clear that the lists of GARs that were referred to Canada did not include Yazidi genocide survivors. We've also had testimony in front of committee from Yazidis who have advocated for the program and whatnot, showing appointments well into the future in terms of selection process. I can't reconcile this, right? I don't want to make proclamations that a system isn't working writ large, but clearly the system didn't work in this situation. Is there something that this committee can recommend in terms of reforming that system so that it's still doing what it's supposed to do in terms of objective criteria, but is also being cognizant of the fact that these women can't get to camps and get on these lists? And if they did, they can't stay there. So how does that system work, right? This is why we advocated for a standalone system, because we weren't getting these people into Canada. What can the UN do? What should we be advocating for in terms of the UN to reform the system so in an emergent situation like this, our asylum system is responsive to a genocide?
That's a very good question. I find it difficult to comment on the very specific situation, but I could say in general that I agree that there are problems with the UN system. There are problems here for the Yazidi refugees, but there are problems all over the world for people who cannot get to camps that are not identified by UNHCR. That I for sure agree with, and that is something that needs further study and detailed recommendations that I can't give you.
Great. I'll pass the mic over to Mr. McGuire.
Thanks, my colleague, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Clifford, what is your budget for training?
What is my budget? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm at liberty to discuss that in such an open forum.
I guess I'm just saying. That there's a huge need from your end, from what you see, to train more people.
Yeah. So I mean, I can give you a couple of numbers, for example, that might put things into perspective. So, for example, the financial people here in my faculty tell me that a classroom needs to have a minimum of 40 students in it before the university breaks even.
Okay.
I would never in a classroom have more than all of my languages combined. I would never have in the classroom more than 15 people, and with a specific language pair, usually no more than 5. So I consistently operate at a loss.
What would it take to find a classroom of 40 to do the job that just before you with the Yazidi people?
It would take the sort of system that I was talking about before, where a number of institutions decide to pool resources and over a remote platform decide to share classes. So that's being done on sort of an ad hoc basis, a little bit here, a little bit there, and it's mostly being guided by the European institutions, so the European Commission, the European Parliament, but that's operating at the level of conference interpreter training rather than community interpreter training. And it's a sporadic here and there. We do 1 or 2 classes a year with the European Parliament and 1 or 2 classes a year with the European Commission, and it brings together maybe 2 or 3 universities at a time.
Yeah, I saw a lot of millions of dollars given away last summer in one particular case. Just to use a number, how far would $10 million go in your effort?
We're talking about $10 million invested within sort of a broader area, divvied up among universities and institutions. That would certainly help. The one thing that we are trying to do as well is to figure out what are the mechanisms by which we can get help graduates bridge from training to actual work and have meaningful work opportunities. And that's an area that we need to explore, because I think that would also help to allay some of the problems that we have with cost.
I'm afraid I need to end you there. Sorry. Ms. Zahid.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all of you for coming today, and special thanks to Nadre Ato for sharing your story. My first question is for Ms. Sadra Hashemi. I know that with the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, you have worked with refugees from around the world who have faced or are facing unimaginable violence and persecution and are seeking to escape from extremely dire circumstances. So could you discuss some of the vulnerable groups that you have worked with and the help they need from the international community, including Canada?
Yes, of course. It's, I've worked with refugees all over the world. I've worked with refugees from Iraq. I've worked for refugees from Namibia, from Sudan, from Eritrea, China. I've worked with refugees all over the world, and first and foremost, they need to get to a safe place, and then once they're here, they need supports. Many of them have suffered extreme violence, and it is a long process for them to feel safe and be able to resettle. And also, a part of that resettlement is being able to be quickly reunified with family members. Thank you.
My colleague Marwan also mentioned that there are about 22.5 million refugees right now. What would you suggest to us as a committee, that how should we structure our refugee system to ensure that the most vulnerable are prioritized for the resettlement here in Canada? And should this be done on an individual or a group basis, or should it be done based on their needs?
In general, I would suggest it should be based on need. But of course, there are always situations where Canada may decide to do a special program and respond to an urgent need. I think the main thing when you look at those numbers is that we need to increase our number of refugees. We need to increase the number of government-assisted refugees. 7,500 is not enough.
How do we make sure that the most vulnerable are prioritized?
Well, as I've said, that's a very difficult task, and I recommend communicating with experts on the ground and using objective criteria.
Do you think that Canada has done a good job as compared to the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, to be honest, most refugees are resettled in neighboring countries and some of the poorest countries in the world. And it is the wealthier countries that are not, in fact, doing their fair share.
My next question is for Mr. Clifford. We have heard testimony about difficulty with access to interpretation services for the newly arrived Yazidi immigrants. We have also heard that there are a number of different dialects with the Kurmanji. So could you discuss the challenges of providing interpretation services to the new Yazidi arrivals? Are there many qualified interpreters in Canada right now? And are they located in the communities where the Yazidi families are resettling?
Okay. So I don't work specifically with Kurmanji. I said that at the outset. There's a restricted number of languages that our program trains for specifically. So I can comment on more broadly on what it means to try and train people who work with languages of lesser diffusion. So one of the things that we notice very often is that there's a pattern. There's a pattern when a new group of people comes to the country, and what tends to happen is that they start showing up at community level services. And it's at that level first that sort of the whole interpreting infrastructure first takes note that all of a sudden a hospital is saying, we need Kurmanji. Community centers saying we need Kurmanji, and then it's up to the agencies and the institutions, the training institutions, to try and respond. So we don't really get a sort of first alert, if you will, to say, hey, by the way, we're about to bring in this new wave of people. These are their language needs, and can you kind of come to it and snap to attention? And this is different from what we see elsewhere. So, for example, if I contrast this with conference interpreting at the European institutions, each time that there's even the remote possibility that a new member state will be added and a new language enters into the mix, there's a whole sort of cadre of people that spring into action and start preparing for language services to be provided. We could do a little bit to imitate that pattern.
I'm afraid I need to end you there. I think it's Mr. McGuire. You're the last one standing on that side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of questions still that I never got before. There's so many on this issue. But to Ms. Addo, I would ask a question of, I know you've been through a lot, and the first step was, as Ms. Sedra Hashmi just said, how is getting people relocated. The second one is in my area would be that I follow is to get some kind of help here or in the relocated country. And the third one, of course, is reunification of family. Are those the three issues that are most important to you?
اون ازدیا بیناور آکنجی بکن دوراجی او بیدوی وان خواستی وان هنه جیبینن یک جمال باتاتا دیاتا بیجه خواستی کی تایی کی دن هات بیجه تشتی کی تتخازی ام جمره بیجی
يعني أفضل خازم
أو دا خازي تنا دا خاز كده
مديا دا خازا ولا نقلك إزديا بيرن بيدري يعني جبركو الخيمات هذا الخيمات يعني ناس تارة يعني وكل شارع هذانا.
All I want, there is a lot of, it's very bad condition. Is the people they living in tent? All I want, if you could bring more Yazidi family over here to Canada to help them, because the situation over there she's describing, like living in the tent and what happened to them is kind of very difficult for the family. All she needs, she say, if you could help bring them over more.
I think that statement shows the kind of people that we're dealing with, very selfless. Caring for others is more important than the fact that she is here now. To the others, I guess I would just want to add to Mr. Rose, you said that there was a flagrant disregard. Don't fund the UNHCR program anymore. Can you expand on that? I mean, are there other methods besides the UNHCR that we could be bringing these types of refugees to Canada?
Can you just repeat the last statement you just made?
Well, I'm just wondering if there are other methods to bring people here besides the normal ones that we're using.
I know there are NGOs on the ground, and I know other organizations that are know who the Yazidis are who are in desperate need. A lot of them aren't registered with the UN for all the reasons that we know. And we know now that the United States is now working through USAID to divert its, I think, $1.3 billion that it was allocating for the minorities in Iraq to help them, and has found that that money isn't going there. So they have a way of being able to do it through USAID and through contacts on the ground. So I'm not an expert on this. I have just contacts with some people who have been on the ground in Iraq. But from the little that I know, it could be done.
Would there be need for more Ezra and Abraham programs?
Yes. Yes, I believe that it would be extremely helpful if every community had volunteers on the ground who could help. We've seen so many wonderful successes within our own program that I think about the communities that don't have these volunteers and how much more difficult it must be for them. So yes, I would highly recommend that.
How would those that are not in connection with the government today be able to get in touch with them and to have them accredited to bring these people in? What would be required?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
The groups that you indicated could use more help.
Yeah.
How would you recommend that they get in touch with the government? And how can the government help them be the arm that brings more of these people in?
That's a challenging question. I know that we're trying to work very much with the government NGOs that are on the ground trying to help resettle people. It's through these NGOs that we need to work. Unless we can establish our own direct relationship with the government, which would be wonderful for us, it would be very helpful. But while we're working with the NGOs, we are finding a lot of communication breakdown. So, for example, let's just take this simple thing about the...
I need you to wrap up quickly, sorry.
Okay, Yazidi, okay.
I can wrap up.
Just the Yazidis being hungry. If we hadn't told the Yazidis to contact their caseworker and say we're hungry, they never would have gotten the help, so...
Thank you. We're going to turn to Mr. Sarai now, but just he's offered me one of his minutes, and I want to ask a question. Every witness gives their personal understandings and testimony from their personal experience at each committee, and they're all welcome. I do need to ask, though, Ms. Sadra Hashimi, we had testimony this morning that Muslims should not be brought to this country because they are a danger. Do you agree with that?
No, I do not.
Mr. Rose, it was brought to this committee that Muslims should not be brought to this country. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not, no.
Ms. Rose?
No, I don't agree with that, no.
Thank you. Mr. Clifford?
Absolutely, I don't agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sarai?
Sure. Thank you to all the witnesses, and I want to really thank you, Nader Otto, for sharing her experience. I think it would be safe for me to say that everyone here, their hearts bleed when we hear your stories. I grew up in a culture where I heard of stories of genocide to my community multiple times, and on hearing this Yazidi study last time and now finding out that your community has gone through it over 70 times is amazing to see that you survive and your persistence and your will, and I want to commend you and your whole community for that. I want to say our job here is to make sure you're feeling safe. Your journey here is as easy as possible to make it as comfortable and safe as possible. And on that regards, I want to ask you, do you feel safe and comfortable in Canada?
لا الحمد لله أنها يعني أزا مرتاحم بس يعني إشبركو يعني أهلي من يلبامنا وإشبر يعني يزيد ياهم أصنع مرتاحم بس يعني قلق يزل كندا أب كيف إم قلق يجي ممنونم ويعني هكذا إشبر يعني السباسيا يعني بعنا أبد هندي لشنيد هندي قلق سباسيا وانت كم حكا نشوان با يعني أرزاقش يزيد يارانا تشو أفاسالك أعزب جاوي خد بينم يعني كسي أرزاق ويعني مساعدة زديانا كريا بس بريطانيا يعني قالك مساعدة زديا كنا وكندا قالك ممنون شهندية بريطانيا.
She's very thankful. She said, I'm safe here, but I don't have a good time because when all I think about my daughter and my mom and my family over there, so that's why I'm not comfortable. But otherwise, I feel safe and secure here. But and also, she's thankful for especially Britain government and also Indian NGO and those people. They were really helpful for our people, and also special thank to Canada. Canada has been really helpful for us. That's all she's mentioning, like she's safe here, but she's not happy about her family in that situation.
So we completely understand, and it's a plight of a lot of refugees to get their siblings and their extended family here, and it's a difficult thing with the parameters that we work with, and we would like to especially if you were able to locate your daughter to help them get into Canada. What can we do to help you feel better integrated in Canada, meaning being able to adjust to Canada? Obviously, we can't compensate for the feeling of longing of your missing family and loved ones, but how can we make it better for you to settle in Canada and make Canada your home?
بجام زنن أمن كارنجي مويت شوي تجي بكن يعني خليكي معزنة لدي ساجي أم تشد كارن بكن يعني هندك اشترى آري كاربن كوي داري يعني رنشنا ورا حبنا تبرا اشترى هي سامتر بك درحت بمرتاح
يعني مدبيا بس إذا دي عقلك عبين البيت ناي دس 11 غيري دس 11 ومدبيا يعني جابي واني إذا ديابي يعني بيفرابن يعني بوسي سالا يعني كجو جني مال دس 11 دنا بليدانن بقرينا يعني أزفو روجي كي هاتاي فاري هردو دس متكلم شاكريبون وزارو مل دورا متقرين إجبركو يعني مش بشرف وناموسي خو مناهلا يعني هروز بكافم بيعو شريادا ديم ليدانا سرمبو دستم هاتاي فاري الكلام شاكريبون همود وكا منا نبس أزبتني يزيدي همود وكا منا.
All I want from you guys to help bring more AZD because I've been there, I gone through, she said I was kind of handicapped one day and my kids in front of my eyes because I defend my honor like didn't go the way they want, but that's why I gone through a lot. But I want Canada be helpful, bring more family which I know they needy, bring here in Canada and be helpful and watch AZD community over there and feel responsibility for defending them and
Thank you. I need to end there. I'm worried we're going to have bells at 10:40, so we need to have a fairly quick ending to this meeting because I've got to get some instructions for the analysts in before 10:40. So I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony. It is a rich experience for this committee to have someone who is a refugee among us, an interpreter helping that refugee, an exceptional agency committed to the cause of helping them, and a lawyer and an interpreter and trainer of interpreters with us. So it's a very rich day. Thank you very much. We're going to have a very quick turnaround because we need to go to an in-camera meeting. Thank you.